Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first RELO Andes webinar of 2022. I'm so happy to be here with you. I see some people jumping into the chat box already. Good afternoon. Greetings. Thanks for letting me know where you're joining from. I am a new face for you. My name's Kati Casto, and I'm an English language specialist. And I am joining you from Seattle in the state of Washington in the United States today. So where are you joining from? I see some friends, some teachers joining from Peru, from Algeria, welcome. From Bolivia, welcome everyone, good afternoon. Happy New Year to you as well. Welcome from Santiago, Chile. Hello, Marcela, welcome. I am so excited to see so many teachers jumping in to join us for this webinar. Today, we're going to be reflecting on the lessons we've learned from what we call pandemic era teaching and learning. Now, we know the pandemic is not over yet, but through these last 2 years and now as many school systems are going back to school in person after being virtual, it seems like a good time to start the year with some reflection on what's happened over these last 2 years with our teaching and with our students learning. So that's what we'll be getting into today. So I'll take a minute to introduce myself. Hello, it's so nice to meet you. I'm seeing even more comments from Iquitos, from Texas. Good afternoon, everyone. From Cusco, welcome. As I said, my name is Kati. I have taught English language to students and teachers for 15 years now. And I have been blessed to be a teacher in many different countries. I spent most of my time in El Salvador in Central America. And I even did spend some time in Cusco, Peru as well. So it's nice to see so many people joining us. So nice to meet you. I'll be here with you for the upcoming next few webinars. So I hope some topics seem relevant to you and that you'll continue to join. Remember that RELO Andes webinars happen on the third Thursday of each month. So the best way to stay in contact is to follow on Facebook. If you're joining watching this live, I know you've already found the RELO Andes Facebook, so I'm so glad to see you. Here's our goal for this short webinar today. We're going to take some time together to reflect on first our role as teachers. I think always it's helpful to check in whether you've been a teacher for 1 year or 10 years or 50 years, to check in with yourself as a teacher and see how you're feeling. We'll also reflect on our experience in the school year of 2020 and the school year of 2021. Now that we're entering 2022 in the new world as it is after these last 2 tumultuous years. And then, of course, we'll spend some time reflecting on our lessons learned, what we've learned over these last 2 years, so that they can inform the future of education, our future as teachers, and the future presently of potentially going back to school in person with your students for the first time in a while. So that's our goal for this webinar today. And as I mentioned, starting with checking in with ourselves about our role as teachers. I share this little comic that says the jobs of a teacher to give us some reference to think about, what does teaching mean to you? We know that teaching, as teachers, we know that teaching is one of the hardest jobs on the planet. Oftentimes, we're not just a teacher who gets to teach. We have all these other jobs as well. Sometimes we are IT support, especially these last 2 years. We have been a lot of technical support for our students and their families, for ourselves and our colleagues also. Sometimes it feels like teaching is a lot of paperwork. Ooh, I have had some serious grading Sundays where I feel like I'm buried under a sea of grading and paperwork as a teacher. Sometimes maybe it feels like teaching is entertainment. Whatever you got to do to get your students engaged is what we do as teachers, right? We try and engage them in any way possible, engaging all their different senses into our classrooms, whether it's virtually or in person. So thinking about all these different jobs, the pieces of being a teacher, I share with you this quote that says, "The fundamental premise of being a teacher is to add value to the learning of each student in your care." So our purpose is to add value to that learning. The act of teaching should be able to focus on enabling students to learn more than they would on their own. So being the catalyst for them to learn. And also improving the possibilities that each student can realize their potential, regardless of their situation in life. So when I think about teaching and my purpose as a teacher, I often reflect on my role as adding value to the learning of all of my students, knowing that every one of my students is capable to learn, and it's my job to enable or to help them reach the goals that they have with their learning so that they have access to all the opportunities that they deserve in the future. So thinking about your role as a teacher or an educator and all these pieces, the many jobs we have, the purpose of what we do, thinking about ourselves as perhaps professionals, maybe facilitators, builders of relationship, communicators of pro-social behaviors and encouragement, protectors of our students and lifelong learners ourselves. How are you feeling about your role as a teacher? What is keeping you attached to your purpose? These last 2 years of 2020 and 2021 have been some of the toughest in the entire world, right? In the globe, not just for teachers, but for everyone. So when we reached this point of having to be super flexible and redefine what our role as teachers is, it's helpful for me to think about all these different pieces of my job and what keeps me centered on the purpose of serving my students. I see some teachers jumping into the comments with what teaching means to you. It's getting to know students, being in touch with them, and knowing their necessities. Definitely, getting to know our students is the first step to engaging with them in education at all, right? We've got to know our students, and that's a big piece, as you can see on this mind map, a big piece of that builder of relationships. Building relationships is a large part of our jobs as teachers. So as we reflect on our role going into this new year, this new school year, how do we stay connected to our purpose as teachers? I think the first thing that we can do is to believe all our students are capable. Believe all of your students are capable of learning, because they are. I see Karima encourage them to use their voice in the class. Definitely. Believing your students are capable and encouraging them to use their voice or to participate is a great way to stay connected to our purpose as teachers. We can also stay connected to our purpose as teachers by considering ourselves lifelong learners. Now, I know that you all already think of yourself as a lifelong learner because you are attending this webinar. Attending a webinar, staying connected with learning as a teacher is a great way to embody that role of a lifelong learner. Encouraging each other is especially important at the start of this year. And by each other, I mean among teachers. Encourage your fellow teachers. This year might feel super intimidating for many teachers as we're going into another year of the unknown. Who knows what this year is going to bring after the last 2 years of tumultuous adventure. This new year can be intimidating. So encouraging our fellow teachers, our colleagues, is a great way to build our community and to feel connected to our purpose, our role as an educator. And then, of course, the center of this webinar today, reflect on your teaching practice. Taking time to reflect on your teaching practice, I think, is the best way to stay connected to your purpose as a teacher, to your role as an educator. If you spend time reflecting on what happens in your classroom, reflecting on what you know about your students, reflecting on your progress as a teacher and what you learn in webinars, in interactions with colleagues, all of those reflecting pieces build into the 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 piece of your role, being connected to your role as a teacher that will serve us all in the future. So there are lots of different ways that we can reflect as teachers. Many times we reflect when we receive feedback from a supervisor, perhaps, or even feedback from a student. Getting feedback from a supervisor who observes our class or who sees some of our students' work, or getting feedback directly from our students on our teaching can be the catalyst, the impetus for us to start reflecting. Using feedback as something to look at to build goals for you in your classroom in the future is a great first step, especially if you have a confident relationship with your supervisor or a system of feedback with your students where students feel safe to share with you feedback as well. Oh, I see Gabby in the comments. Reflecting is such an important part of our role as teachers. I definitely agree. Another great way to start reflecting, a strategy that we can use to reflect as teachers, is to record our lessons, if at all possible. With virtual learning, if you're still teaching virtually, that might mean screen recording on your computer if you're able at certain times of your lesson where you want to watch back yourself teaching and see how you can change perhaps what your process is or the way that you talk. When we're in person, what I used to do was just prop up my phone in my classroom and hit record at different parts of the lesson where maybe I was feeling like I want to make sure that I'm communicating this correctly to my students. So recording lessons is another strategy for reflection that we can rely on as teachers. Peer observations is another great reflection strategy. So if it's possible for you to visit your peer, your colleagues, other teachers in your schools and see what's happening in their classrooms, share your practice together, you can reflect on your own teaching practice in community with other teachers who are growing and learning through their careers as well. And then, of course, there's space for teacher self reflection. So, spending time with yourself, sometimes this looks like the teacher diary, spending time with yourself after a lesson or after a day to reflect on what you perceive went well, what you perceive you might change for the future lesson or for the next day, or where you need to invest in your students. Feedback is really important. You're right. You're right. I see a comment asking about student feedback. There are so many different ways to get students to give you feedback in a way that isn't too dramatic. Sometimes teachers get worried about asking students what they think because who knows what they'll say, right? Maybe they have a really strong opinion that might catch you off guard. For me, I like to give students different options for how they can give feedback. It could be that we have a secret note where a student can give anonymous feedback, either electronically through a survey or physically in the classroom. But oftentimes I will ask students as I'm checking for their understanding throughout the class, as I'm checking to make sure that they're understanding what we're learning, I'll ask them, how was that activity for you? Tell me what you thought about that activity or how we could change it. And it can be such a quick conversation to have in the moment to gather some feedback from your students. Okay, so let's keep going with our teacher self-reflection this afternoon. We're going to look now at some lessons learned from 2020 and 2021. And I picked out 3 categories for lessons learned, and I'm going to ask you to reflect as we go through and share your reflections with us in the chat box if you're watching live. The first bit is thinking about the traits for success, what we've learned about characteristics that we can work towards and embody as students during this time. The second piece, centering our full humanity and health. This has been a huge lesson learned for me these last 2 years, thinking about how we can look at ourselves as whole humans that aren't just workers, not just teachers, but centering our full humanity. And then finally, the lessons learned about technology have been incredible these last 2 years. So we'll take a look at that and reflect in that piece too. So first, reflecting on these traits for success. Which traits or characteristics have we learned are important for teaching success? And I mean, what have we learned these last 2 years that have really stuck out as things that are especially important for teachers? For me, the first one, flexibility. It is so important to be flexible as a teacher, especially in times where everything is unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. These last 2 years have forced me to learn how to be especially flexible when I'm someone who likes to have control. I like to know what's going to happen and be confident with what's happening next. So being flexible means being okay with adjusting, maybe having a plan B or a plan C or a plan D to make sure that no matter what comes up, we can adjust and be flexible to the needs of our students. Another trait that I've learned this past couple years through the pandemic has been patience. Man, it has been so important for me to be patient with myself, patient with my students, patient with my colleagues, and think about how to embody that trait of patience so that I don't have as much anxiety in my life. Another trait I think is especially important for us as teachers out of these last 2 years is perseverance. Oh man, there were some times in these last couple years where I felt so low. I felt down and feeling tired and scared and frustrated. And as a teacher, I hit that place where I felt like, is this even worth it? Is it worth it? Can we make it? Maybe you felt that way over the last couple of years during this pandemic as well. But perseverance is a trait that we've learned is so important for teaching success. We persevere through those hard challenges to make it out the other side. Ooh, I see connection and optimism. Oh my goodness, those are excellent traits for success. The last one I want to share with you is passion. Connecting with myself as an educator and the passion that I have for teaching has helped me to be successful these last 2 years as well. I see so many jumping already into the chat box. Thank you for sharing your ideas. Take some time and reflect and share with us which teaching traits have you gained or have you developed during the pandemic. So I shared my 4, and I see some others. Ooh, resilience. Yes, Sylvia. Resilience is a huge one that we've gained during this pandemic. Rosemary spoke straight to it. Try, and never give up, right? That's being resilient for sure. I see Edison says having an open mind for changes. Definitely. That's a great reflection. And it relates right to that idea of being flexible as well. Having an open mind for any changes that come up. Thanks for sharing your reflections in the chat box. Keep them coming. I'll share with you this next kind of category out of the last 2 years as we reflect on this pandemic, these 2 years of the pandemic. Something that's really stuck out for me is this idea of centering our full humanity and our health. It's been easy in the past for me to neglect different aspects of my health. But during the pandemic, I had to learn that each piece of my humanity and health is equally important. My physical health is important. My mental health is important. My emotional health and my spiritual health equally as important. Many times teachers are very overworked. We spend long hours working in our classrooms. We go home, we keep working at home. This pandemic, with us working from home most of the time, the lines between home and school or home and work have been very blurred, where, especially for me, if there's something going on at work that's important or stressful, I will spend extra time, stay up late working on things, and I neglect my physical health. I neglect my sleep, my nutrition. The mental health aspect of our humanity has been a big piece of this pandemic as well. Checking in with our families, our friends, making connections and making sure that everyone is hanging in there and persevering and doing okay. Those have been some aspects of our health these last 2 years that have really come to the surface for our students and for us as teachers. So thinking about these different pieces of your health or different pieces of your life as a teacher or as a human, reflect on your own experience. Have there been some areas of your health that you've especially cared for during this pandemic, that you've made it a point to be cautious or caring for that piece of your health? Or maybe there's a piece of your health that you've neglected. Like I said, for me, I neglected my sleep sometimes during this pandemic when I got stressed with work being right there in my living room. So think about your own experience. Have there been areas of your health that you've cared for, or some that you've neglected during the pandemic? Well, I see Rosemary says, sometimes our role is so stressful. Yes, I agree. Sometimes our role is really stressful. So connecting with those different pieces of who we are, our mental health, our emotional health. Yes, Mariana, I feel that too. Mental health has been really tough during this pandemic. I see Edison says, I neglected sleeping time. Me too. It's hard. It's hard when there are so many unknowns in the world and anxiety is high to care for our physical needs. Leslie says, I neglect my self-care. That's an interesting reflection too. What are you missing out on by not engaging in self-care, by taking care of yourself, right? All of them are definitely important. All of them are important, and taking the time to reflect. So if you know that you've neglected your mental health, what can you do to care for your mental health this coming year, this next year of the pandemic as it continues? That's what this reflection time is for, is to check in with yourself and think, okay, I've neglected this piece of my health. I'm going to make it a priority this year. Okay, so as we jump into this last bit of reflection, the area of technology. Now, technology has been a huge piece of education these last 2 years, because in March or April of 2020, when the pandemic started and all the schools, almost globally, all the schools started going remote, technology became a huge, important piece. In my reflections of how technology has impacted my teaching and my students' learning over this pandemic, I thought a lot about interaction and communication. Using technology to interact with students, to communicate with students and their families, is a huge, important part of staying connected during virtual learning. So reflecting on that interaction and communication, for me, I spent a lot of my time in virtual meetings this past 2 years, in Zooms and Google Meets and Teams meetings and on FaceTime with my family. So interaction and communication was a big piece of technology this last 2 years that really impacted how we teach and how our students learn. It also opened up the world of collaboration remotely. Having those communication technologies like FaceTime or video calls or Zooms, for me, it opened this new door of collaboration where I, in the past, most frequently collaborated with people that I was in person with, my most close colleagues in my school. Because of the pandemic, my collaboration doors open to a lot of interactions with people, not just in my area or in my school, but beyond, globally. Here we are joining from all over the world in this virtual collaboration space, right? Technology has allowed us to get connected with very interesting teachers from all over the globe, definitely. That's one of the greatest advantages of having technology that spans all across borders, right? We can interact from all different parts of the globe. Thank you for that comment. Another way that technology has opened some doors for us during this pandemic as teachers is thinking about input and output for our students. For me, I'm always keeping my eye out for options to differentiate for my students based on what their needs are. So, not every lesson is right for every student. Sometimes students need something special, need a differentiation, a scaffold, a change in input, how they receive information, or a change in output, how they let us know that they're learning, right? Technology gives us lots of options for differentiating input and output. So often I think about giving access to students for how they receive information in terms of maybe they need something auditory, maybe they need a video to watch, maybe they need something to read physically, all those different ways that they can input. Even for this webinar, you have access to captions for if that's an input accessibility that you'd like to take advantage of. Technology gives us that opportunity to differentiate the input and also the output. Many times I think about my very first teaching year where I was teaching young kids, young kindergarten and first grade students. And I had some students who loved to write. They loved to have something in their hand, a utensil. They loved to create with their hands. And then I had one specific student who did not want anything to do with writing with their hands. They were very physical and loved to sing and to dance and to act. And so I had to be creative about how I engaged my students in a variety of different output options to reach the same end goal. Technology has given us tons of output options also. I saw someone jump into the chat about using different platforms such as a word wall, a live worksheet. Yes, Rosemary. Thinking about how we use different technology tools to engage our students and to have them share with us what they're learning as well. That relates directly to this idea of asynchronous options. Synchronous teaching and learning has happened virtually in those online learning platforms, right? The Zooms and the Google Meets. But asynchronous options allow students to engage with learning even when the class is not meeting. So many technologies have come out allowing students to engage in some online reading, some videos, and it helps to keep our students involved in the class even when class is not running. And then finally, technology accessibility was a huge piece of this pandemic. What we found out at the beginning of the pandemic in March, April of 2020 was how many students did not have access to technology at home. Was that something that you saw in your schools as well? It was this big moment of reality that our students need accessibility to technology at home in order to engage with learning throughout these past 2 years. And now even as we go back to in-person learning, accessibility is still an important piece to carry from the pandemic into the future, making sure that all of our students have access to technology no matter where they are. So reflect on your experience. Technology can be a tough one because technology can change the way that we teach for the better. It can give us access, it can give our students access to things that they didn't have before the technology. And it also can change our students' learning. It can change how they're accessing the class. So, how has been your experience with technology during these last 2 years of virtual or remote learning? I see Karima says many applications have been useful to keep learners engaged outside the classroom. For instance, WhatsApp, Messenger, and others. Definitely. We use technology to stay in contact with our students and their families to see what's going on. Worksheets and educator games, too. Absolutely. Perhaps you're a teacher who likes to use games, technology games, internet games with your students, especially when learning language. Boom cards helps a lot for sure. A technology that I used this past year for the first time was Padlet. Padlet is this technology where you can have many people engage with a note-taking kind of device from all over, and it presents your notes in a really engaging visual way. And I've used Padlet so much over this pandemic because it's a new technology for me and one that's been really helpful for my students too. Thanks for all your ideas and reflections in the chat box. WhatsApp, Google Meet, Zoom, for sure, we've used a lot. The US Embassy uses Padlet also. Oh, I see. Juan Jose says, I loved Flipgrid for video presentations when students couldn't make it to class. I've used Flipgrid also. Flipgrid's such a great resource that helps get a quick video with your students as well. Kahoot, definitely. Mentimeter. I see so many of these tools that you've relied on these last 2 years. And the joy of reflecting on these tools is that now that you've learned about them and use them in your virtual teaching, how might you use them in the future, even when you go back in person with your students? We don't want to drop off all of these great technology resources we've gained and learned. We want to continue to use them to engage our students in classrooms, whether we're virtual or in person. Oh, I see ClassKick. Yeah, that's a great one too. Learning different apps and using them to create different activities so the students can have a little fun. Definitely, Lydia. I make sure anytime I use something new, a new app or a new technology resource, that I check it first for me. I use it on myself first to make sure I know how to use it and that I know how user-friendly it is for my students. Definitely. Thanks, everyone, for your ideas. So as we wrap up reflecting on these 3 areas, so the traits that we gained as teachers, being flexible, having perseverance, our centering our humanity, all the pieces of our health, our mental health, our emotional and physical health, and then thinking about technology, which resources we used and loved and that served us during this time. Using all those reflections, what are our COVID keepers? This is what we've been calling the things that we learned during the pandemic, the things that we learned and used that now we're going to keep into the future. What are we going to keep even when we go back to in-person learning with our students? Start thinking about this because I'm going to ask you to share your COVID keepers with me, and I'll share a few of my COVID keepers with you. The first thing I'm keeping with me that I've learned these last 2 years is the importance of connection. Oh man, in our lives, it can be so easy to isolate ourselves when our mental and physical and emotional health is not feeling great, when we're feeling anxious or down. Having connection with our colleagues, with our friends, with our families, with our partners is something that I tried to foster in my life as a teacher these last 2 years, and what I'm going to keep in the future. I'm going to keep it as an important piece, that connecting piece with people who I care about and who care about me. Another COVID keeper for me is this idea of grace. Having grace for myself means being patient with myself and with others as well when times are tough and when it might be hard to live up to the expectation that I've set for myself. Giving myself grace gives me some space to check in, to reflect, and to reset goals that make most sense for me in the moment. I'm going to keep that idea of grace into the future for sure. And then finally, a COVID keeper for me is technology access. The technology access battle is not over. Even though many of our students during the last 2 years have gotten access to technology in their homes, many still have not. Internet access is a huge issue for students globally. So I'm going to continue in the pursuit of technology access for all of our students, as well as one of my COVID keepers. So reflect on your experience these last 2 years and share some of your COVID keepers in the chat. So what are some things that you learned or you gained or you experienced during virtual learning or during this global pandemic that you're going to keep in the future? I see using interactive activities to motivate students. Definitely. That's a COVID keeper for sure. Using interactive activities. Time to disconnect. Yes, thank you, Edison. That's a COVID keeper for me too. Time to connect and time to disconnect, especially if you're in your devices all day long. Oh, what a beautiful comment. I've learned that I'm stronger than the issues. Yes, you are strong. Gratitude. Oh, that one resonates for me too, Sylvia. Having gratitude for everything that we have and all that we embody. Absolutely. Leslie says, all platforms we learn. Definitely. Keeping those platforms that you've learned over the last 2 years, the technology that you've utilized, keep them for the future. Another great comment. Teachers are human beings and we can feel vulnerable in front of our students. It's okay. Yes, we are whole humans with mental and emotional and physical health. It's okay to be a real human with your students and with your colleagues for sure. It creates connection. Thank you everyone for sharing your COVID keepers. And if you're watching this after the live, be sure to add your COVID keepers to the comments so we can see. I will keep my beginner's mind. Oh yeah, interesting. Keeping the mind of our beginners up front. Less is more when you're with your loved ones. Oh, definitely. These are great ideas. So I hope with all of these COVID keepers, you're gaining some ideas and some connection with colleagues who have shared a similar experience, a similar reality with you these last 2 years. Ooh, be more encouraging for sure. That's a great COVID keeper, being encouraging. Ooh, I see resilience again as a COVID keeper, definitely. Empathy as a COVID keeper, being empathetic. Absolutely. All of these reflections are so important. And this is the perfect time of year, the start of a fresh year, to continue these reflections. on your own or in community with colleagues and other people as well. I want to invite you to continue reflecting with me and with others tomorrow during the post-webinar discussion group. You'll see a link posted to the RELO Andes Facebook after this webinar for you to register in advance for the discussion. We'll meet tomorrow, the 21st, Friday the 21st at 2 p.m. Lima time in a Zoom room. It'll be a great time for you to bring some more questions you might have about this topic of reflecting on what we've learned, and also bring with you some of your reflections, some of the things that you've gained, so you can share them with colleagues that join as well. So I'm really looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better tomorrow at this post-webinar discussion. And then make sure that you mark your calendars, because next month we'll be back together on the third Thursday, February 17th at 2 p.m. Lima time. We're going to talk all about back to school tips for returning to in-person learning. Since many, many school systems are returning to in-person learning for perhaps the first time in 2 years coming up this next couple months, we'll talk all about back to school on Thursday, February 17th. I hope to see you all there at the live webinar. So with that, I'll say thank you so much for joining. Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you again in the future. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.